Welcome everybody to this month's webinar, which is actually a follow-up of our webinar from last month. This is part 2 of our practical tutorial for success webinar on how to effectively implement an environmental monitoring system. And today we're going to look at the validation and handover process. And for any newbies that are here, we welcome you. And if you are looking for last month's webinar details, please send me an email, jasonkay@golighthouse.com, and I can definitely hook you up there with last month's webinar. So let's just jump into this. And before we get started, my name is Jason Kelly. I'm the Vice President of Services here at Lighthouse Worldwide Solutions. And my experience spans worldwide managing monitoring system projects over, heading towards 27 years now. So I've been doing this for quite a while. Before we get into today's presentation, if you do have any questions, feel free to type them in at any time, and I will address those questions, and we'll also be looking at some common questions to ask at the end of today's presentation. Last month, we covered the procurement and installation process of the project, and we want to go over topics where we focused on the importance of the procurement stages and the need for strong project management using detailed facility drawings and site installation management are vital in these early stages. We talked our way through all of that last month. We covered the types of facility structures and the sensor installation types, along with following project plans and schedules. So let's have a look at the EMS process flow. I want to kind of recap a little bit, especially for anybody that's new in today's audience. So the EMS process flow I put together many years back, basically observed the GAMP-V model and the outcomes of many successful projects, and it covers each stage of the process, including the responsibilities. And as we can see, it starts off with the risk assessment, the URS, the quote stage, and the auditing and the supplier, the vendor. So we have like a little short description of what a risk assessment is. For those of you unaware, a formal risk assessment is developed during the initial stages by the customer to figure out what they need for the monitoring system and to identify any risks in the facility and things like critical areas to monitor, the locations, the type of sensors needed, the duration of monitoring, alarming, the number of sensors. All these things need to be considered, what particles, what sizes, the flow rates. And there's a lot involved in the risk assessment. And we did talk about having a need, if be, to have an external consultant come along and help if the internal team did not have that in-house knowledge. The URS, user requirement specification, again developed by the customer, it's really developed based on the findings of the risk assessment. Now, your risk assessment should be very detailed, and from the risk assessment, you can develop a really good, strong, robust user requirement specification. The user requirement specification is typically sent on to vendors to look over and to comment on, and then to submit a quotation. And then the customer will look at all the vendors, maybe do some audits and look at the responses to the URS, look at the quotation, and select a vendor to do the project. So these are the initial stages of the EMS process flow. And each stage is, significant as we move along the process. Once the customer has selected the vendor, it's really important to have a good kickoff meeting with that vendor, because all the details need to be discussed, all of the aspects of the project, who's involved, the different stakeholders, especially their friends in the IT department. Get them on board early so they know what's involved, because they've, in my experience, have always been the path to a lot of resistance. So really the kickoff meeting is when the project manager will set the meeting, the project in full flow, and meet with everybody, set the expectations. There they can look at some quality plan, develop a quality plan, submit the quality plan, look at scheduling, and then move on to the other stages of the process. You know, once the customer is happy with the scheduling, the quality plan, and overall, then these meetings may take over a couple of weeks. It's not just a one-hour meeting. There could be several meetings. And from that, then we move on to the functional design specification. Once everything is lined up, the FDS is a document used by companies in pre-development phase to translate all notes, concepts, and scope into a complete requirements document. And if the FDS is a kind of a, I would call it not a closed document once it's signed off. It's a live document that evolves as the project evolves as well. So it's definitely is setting the functional description of the project, and things may change. You know, I've seen some things during project where customers have defined what they wanted in the URS and then realize, oh, you know what, I think we're going to change a couple of things here because, you know, we're getting more information, we're getting more experience, and what we have initially put down really isn't suiting the process. So they define things a bit more. And then the functional design spec will get updated to the next revision and so on. As long as you're keeping good change control management process going on. So here we see this stage of the EMS process flow. We have the selecting the EMS supplier, kickoff meeting with the project managers on both sides. And I do recommend that we have not only a project manager from the vendor, but also the customer needs to have a person who is the one point of contact, and preferably with some project managing experience. And the quality plan is reviewed, and the quality plan specifies the quality standards, the practices, the resource specifications, and all sequence of activities along with the Gantt chart, and we looked at last month in a bit of detail. And really the FDS is the design of the system, and once that gets signed off, we can definitely move on to the next stage, design review. The customer and the EMS supplier will go through the design review and make sure that the design meets the requirements. So it's traceability back to the URS, looking at risk and how the design mitigates the risks that have been brought up in the risk assessment. Once the design review is complete, then it's on to the build and test phase, where the system is built and tested by the EMS supplier. It could be FAT done before the system is shipped on site. The FAT is basically a factory acceptance test that looks at all aspects of the system, making sure it's connecting, the software is running, the hardware is running, etc. And that's done before it's sent to site. With the system delivery then after that, then the site acceptance testing, like a commissioning. So the site acceptance is kind of like a advanced FAT, because now everything is arrived on site. The system should be installed and put together. And you know, we did talk about the GAMP fee model. Here is the GAMP fee model that we basically covered in the EMS process flow. So we're down here right now, down at this stage. I'll get my laser pointer there, SAT stage. So you see at the bottom, the FAT and SATs are the point prior to the system becoming operational on site, before it's been delivered and then it gets commissioned on site with a site acceptance test. For those of you not totally familiar with GAMP, here we go. It stands for Good Automated Manufacturing Practice, which is a system for producing quality equipment using the concept of prospective validation following a life cycle model, specifically designed to aid suppliers and users in the pharmaceutical industry. So GAMP is really transparency, where everything should be traced back to the URS, and the user requirement specification was covered to meet all the requirements that had been highlighted in the risk assessment. And I really feel like starting off strongly with the risk assessment and a really strong URS and following the GAMP fee model, everything will fall into place. You know, a risk assessment helps significantly in the development of the URS, and all documentation onwards from the URS should always reference back to the URS and have some traceability. For example, here we see our software traceability matrix for 21 CFR11. And you know, with data integrity and 21 CFR11, it is important to show how the monitoring software meets the criteria. In our traceability matrices, we clearly show how we meet the requirements in each section. So it's important to be able to illustrate how 21 CFR11 is covered. since it is really an important factor in an environmental monitoring system and data integrity and Alcoa, we've all heard of that. And, it's really important to understand and show how, 21 CFR 11 and data integrity is covered. It's a huge aspect because monitoring systems are all about the data. So again, here we are looking back at the V model we've completed with the EMS process flow. We're down to FAT and SAT. We need then to look at the rest of the process and installation qualification, operational qualifications, performance qualification. So let's jump back into the process flow and look at the tail end here. The installation qualification, it's usually completed after the system is fully commissioned. And the IQ, it says installation qualification, okay. But you need to start the IQ with the system fully running. And then you can verify step by step. You go through the IQ protocol and verify each sequence of events is installed as expected, as per manufacturing guidelines, manuals, the URS, and the risk assessment. Same thing with the OQ. The OQ is completed after the IQ has been successfully carried out. And again, it's recommended, during the OQ and near the end of it, just do a dry run, 24 hours, 48 hours, let the system run, hash out any errors, and then have traceability going back to your URS and show that clearly. Closing stages, the training is very important. And I always would like during the IQ and OQ stages for the customer to be really involved. You don't have to have a witness for IQ and OQ, but I would recommend doing so. Not only do you witness what's going on and sign it off, you can also get some great training during the IQ and OQ, because during these stages, we're going to go through some of the operation of the software, the hardware, and it's a really great way to understand the system. And you've got those documents which will show you how to do X, Y, and Z, kind of like a manual in itself. But getting on, after the system has been successfully IQ'd and OQ'd, training is really important for the whole department. And please don't skimp on training. For a system like this, you need a lot of training, particularly if you're going to use it at a high level like an administrator. Operators, you can probably get by with a day's training, maybe 4 to 8 hours. Systems aren't that difficult, particularly with operator lockout. They just give them the basics to do: start, stop the system, acknowledge an alarm if you want to have your operators doing that, or you can shift that to somebody that's kind of like middle management. But really, training is so important, and we offer pretty comprehensive training. We really want to empower our customers to be able to fix things themselves so that they have a sense of empowerment and that they're not intimidated by the system. The performance qualification, I'll really emphasize, and we're going to spend a bit of time going through this during the presentation. The PQ should be carried out by the customer. And please, 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 please do not rehash the OQ. The OQ is a separate verification. What you should be doing is writing your PQ, test every aspect of the weaknesses of the system. You want to be trying to shake the tree and see what apples fall off if they do. You want to test the system to failure. That way you know of your SOPs and what you do when an alarm goes off is effective. Are your alarms even effective? Are they too sensitive? Are they not sensitive enough? Don't fall into the trap of following the certification tables on alarms. Your PQ should establish when your alarm limits, or what value your alarm limits are set at. You know your process. Establish a baseline and go from there. It's written in the standards. You don't have to follow the tables of certification that we see in ISO 14644 or even in EU GMP. Here we see one of our training facilities, and we have a full system running up here on clean room walls and the control cabinet. As you see over here, we have different sensors mounted differently, different types of mounts, portables connected to the system, environmentals, different types of connections, touch screens with the software running. We have alarm lights. So again, you can see we have environmental center wall, remote particle counter wall, air sampling. All this is for air sampling. We call it a remote active count. And we have a live couple of cabinets. We see 2 cabinets here up and running. where all of the I/O and the digital and analog go to. And then in the background, we have like a PC running the system. So we really have a live system. In this facility, we've also got a clean room. In fact, we have 2 facilities with this type of training and clean rooms with live systems running on them. So we really take training seriously, and we can't stress enough: invest in training, invest in your users and yourself, because once you know how to drive the car, you're less likely to crash it. You're less likely to feel intimidated by it. Right, so we've covered the importance of training, and let's kind of move into this performance qualification. And let's just jump back off the EMS process flow. And I really feel the performance qualification is somewhat overlooked from my experience over the years. And performance qualification demonstrates that equipment or the system installed is operational, and it's what it's purported to be and what it's supposed to do. And this is all going back to the URS. A pure URS will result in a poorly executed PQ. Now, when manufacturers take time to plan qualification projects, they sometimes ignore important considerations. Companies often fail to take a science or risk-based approach based on product and process knowledge to define the extent of qualification. And for most part, they redo the OQ protocol and call it good. Nah, please don't do that. That's a major mistake and a missed opportunity to get to know how the system operates and the capacity of the system in a real working environment before you go live. During the IQ/OQ, which is normally conducted by the vendor, in most cases with the customer as a witness, depending on the customer's availability. Again, it is not required in regulatory. You know, the IQ/OQ will test the system that it's running, but the IQ/OQ really needs to, the performance qualification really needs to just, as I say, shake the tree, test the weaknesses. And it should be seen as an opportunity for the customer and end users and managers to fully understand the system. You know, it's kind of, as I said, it's kind of like taking a car for a test drive. You know, customers, you know, the customer end user participation in the IQ is an absolute must. Valuable knowledge is picked up during the IQ and OQ and will help the customer develop a robust PQ. The PQ is driving the car and making sure you can drive without crashing and testing every function of the car. Let's look at some critical factors to be tested during the PQ. Number 1, appropriate alert and action alarm setting. Number 2, PQ validation of the alarms. Okay, it's time to set the alarms, and then you should start validating these alarms to verify that they're working for you and not against you. Number 3, sample location, gathering meaningful data. Are the sensors in the best place? We should have already gone through that in your risk assessment, and PQ should verify that and make sure the sensors are gathering appropriate data based on location. And there's nothing wrong with relocating if you feel you're not getting the best. That's definitely an option. In fact, that's what the PQ is for, the last minute changes before you go operational. Adherence to SOPs are a missed one. Number 4, report generation on real-time events that are either process-driven or simulated. Adherence to SOPs that come into effect during the alarm events. Okay, as an auditor, I'd like to know, well, okay, I know your alarm's gone off, but what have you done? Show me your SOP of how you respond to these alarms and what did you do with the data? How was that alarm escalated? Where is the data? How is it copied? Where is it stored? What impact did it have on the product? What impact did it have on safety? You want to look at operator interventions, what impact that has on product. Look at routine service SOPs. You know, make sure you've got SLAs in place. Make sure you're able to set up your calibration requirements and be notified when calibration's due. You want to look at the backup and recovery of the system and any change control process, making sure you don't make any changes to the system without going through a change control process. I've seen so many systems where we've gone and installed and we've verified on site and validated the system as it is. 6 months later, customer will call us and, hey, we got a problem. What's that? Well, the system's not acting like it should, and you know, we need you to come help us. I said, well, have you done anything or changed anything on the system? Oh, well, IT did put in a new server. Okay. So things like this, you know, if you have a change control process that you're making changes, there's no harm to give us a call and ask us first before you do implement changes, particularly around IT, because if you change your server, you're going to have to need a new license, for example, and you don't want to have to waste downtime. Get all your ducks lined up before you start making these changes, and bring us in. Call us. Let us know what you want to do. We can help you. We can go through that process with you and make some recommendations so you have all your ducks lined up and you're not shooting yourself in the foot. All right, let's look at, did I cover them all? Yeah, I did. Change control process was the last one. Let's go look at these individually. So the term appropriate alert and action limits come from regulatory standards. What is appropriate? Well, really, it's up to you to verify what is appropriate for your process. Remember, you guys are the owners and the masters of your own process. You have all the experience in your process, so putting in appropriate alarms definitely helps. And remember in part one, we illustrated an example of a filling line with all the sensors located along the filling line. Well, appropriate alarms need to be set based on the process and location of these alarms, etc. The last thing you want to do is blindly set alarms based on certification tables. Now, these are general guidelines for certification. With an EMS like this, the monitoring is considered routine monitoring, meaning monitoring during your process, like when the product is under sterile manufacturing. But the last thing you want to do is to put an alarming system into place that works against you. So how many of you out there have experienced those nuisance alarms? I bet quite a few. I want you to be smart about your PQ and to use the information during the PQ to set the alarming system to work for you, not against you. There's many ways you can validate it. Let's have a look at what is unworkable sensitivity. Let's look at an example for a filling line. Is it got an ISO grade A environment or EU Annex 1? Down below, you've got either of these. Look at the 0.5 and 5 micron counts for a volume of a cubic meter. This is based on certification. Do you really want to apply this to your routine monitoring? Because let's say you're sampling for you're making your product for 8 hours. Your monitoring system is sampling away. 4 hours into your manufacturing, you've had zeros on the 5 micron channel, and all of a sudden you get up over 21 counts. Well, if you set your action alarm to be triggered after 20 counts for one sample, if you get 21 when you got an action alarm, what happens then after that 1 minute sample? Then you got 4 more hours of zeros. Do you really think that's an event? That's an adverse event? That one sample, that 1 minute where your 5 microns exceed the alarm limit of 20 particles? Really? I don't think so. You got to be looking at trends. And this is where you work your PQ. You can start putting in your trends. You can start looking at validating the alarm limits. The second key element of a PQ I'd strongly recommend is the validation of alarm limits. What do I mean by that? A risk assessment process should be adopted to produce a science-based approach to setting your SPCs. What are SPCs? I hear you say. Statistical process control limits. You can have your alarms based on the probability of X out of Y events, turning into a decremental trend that will affect product quality. Like getting back to that example I said about the 8 hours, 1 minute out of 8 hours where your 5 microns exceed 20 particles in one spike, is that really a decremental issue? No, it's not. You can validate that. You can go through the process and validate that yourself. And there's a way of doing it. I've done it. So making sure you have statistical process control events, X out of Y events in there, and you understand the probability of the level of X out of Y events having on the product. When we see spikes in particles from particle counters, that doesn't mean we're going to see viable counts. If the filling line and the air barriers are working correctly and the operators are not present, then the probability of viable particles in this alarm that's triggered is extremely low. I would probably say 0. And this can be backed up in the PQ with active air sample and settle plate data. The air sampling should be downstream of the process, i.e. below your sample probe, for example. This can be further evaluated when you purposely introduce the operator intervention into the process. You'll see a spike in particle counts. However, with proper monitoring during the PQ, you can evaluate the impact of that intervention. I've actually written a technical paper on that, and I think it's on a knowledge center. I'll have to double check for you, but definitely a good place to look. It talks about how to perform a PQ. So again, with the level of testing, you can determine if your X out of Y events can be set to like 2 out of 3 counts, or 4 out of 5 events, 7 out of 10 events, etc. And that way you've got more confidence in your system. You know, as well, the other part of the validation, like have your operator intervene. You'll see a spike, and you should see a 0 impact on the viable counts, providing the system, the air, the sterile air, the operator is effectively gowned up properly, no skin exposed, no rips in the gloves, etc. And you should see 0. Then you can also go in and purposely have your operator exposed skin. You have a rip in his gloves, have his sleeve exposed, you know, and then look at the correlation. Most likely you will see that the impact from the operator has occurred because he's got skin particles that are floating around there and onto the surface because he's not properly gowned up. In fact, what I would do is when your alarms are triggered in the real world, have the operator that will be intervening, if need be, to check themselves. Make sure that there's no holes, rips in the gloves, or their sleeves aren't exposed. And then they could put into the notes in the audit trail that they acknowledged the alarm and that they themselves, they checked themselves and they weren't seen to have any exposure. So little things like that you can do to validate your alarm limits, and you can fine tune your alarm limits. I definitely use statistical process control. It's built into some of our software, and it works really well. It's really helpful. Number 3, this is the part we covered last month, looking at the filling line during the validation side. Like I talked about, not the validation, but the installation slide, we talked about the risk assessment. So, you know, the statistical process control depends on the location of the particle counter probe, and the location should be near these critical zones. On a filling line, there's many critical zones, but placement of the isokinetic probe must not interfere with the process or influence airflow over the process in a negative way. Meaning that you don't want to have your probes like above here, the fill head, shadowing the clean air coming down from the HEPA filters. You want to make sure that clean air is coming down, pushing any ingress of particles from the filling machine itself, which will, by nature of its operation, be generating particles with that flow of, you know, the belts and the cogs and everything here. You're going to get particles, but the pressure of the air should keep those particles from jumping up into your product where the vials are exposed as they run along the accumulator and to the fill head, etc. Again, you can check out following some of the guidelines to, you know, the heights and the locations of your probes. You know, so it's really important that you're able to gather meaningful data from the locations, and you've got enough coverage along your fill line that you're not going to potentially miss areas. Again, it's kind of like I always say Goldilocks and the 3 Bears, where Goldilocks is in the house and she tastes the different porridge and she finds the one that's just right, and then she lies down on the beds and she finds the one that's just right. This is kind of like a Goldilocks experience during the PQ. If you put this work in now, I guarantee you're going to have a system that you're going to be happy with and not see it as a nuisance. You know, because you're going to be rolling out product and you don't want that product line to be stopping for nuisance alarms or one-off events. And you can clearly say to an auditor, look, we've validated this and with confidence we can keep going, and we'll just double check that time for any viables, but we've got such confidence to keep going that we've seen in validation that we've done in the PQ that, you know, we have the statistics to show that we're fairly safe. We're very safe, in fact, to keep on going. Number 4, report generation. So we have the software here. We can see we got the main facility. We have inspection rooms gone off. We got an alarm. And again, we have an automated report. This is nice to have. And that way, you know, your reports can be driven by the process and automatically reported on. An EMS can send out an SMS or an email notification, or you can have visual displays, audio beacons, you know, so you don't miss these events, particularly if they're critical events and you got a batch failing. You don't want to be pushing that batch out. You want to do some more investigations. So your reports and during your PQ process, verify your reports are working good. Make sure you got everything you need reporting on, the locations all connected to your reports. And you'll see with this software we have, it's very easy to do that, and reports can be generated per room or the whole facility, depending on what you want. It's very flexible. A good one here is the adherence to your SOPs that come into effect during alarm events. I do know that some regulators, particularly in the circles I move around in, we talk a bit, they like to see, okay, I want to see what you're going to do when your alarm goes off. The regulators and auditors are very interested in your SOPs, and they're even more interested in what you do during an event than the event itself. They want you to demonstrate control. So I would definitely recommend having robust SOPs in place, and you take them for the test drive during the PQ process. That's really important. Operator interventions. You want to limit these as much as possible. And they can impact on product safety, particularly if the person isn't properly gowned up. And that's a big problem. I do, in the past, I've gone into clean rooms and I've seen operators not gowned up properly. I've seen bad practice. It all comes down to training and monitoring. And monitoring the performance of your operators while in the clean room it should be done. I'd even go to, I'm not a fan of Big Brother, but like in situations like this, having cameras on the fill line, particularly in critical areas, that when alarms are triggered, you can trigger that time slot for when the alarm is triggered. You can go back and look on a camera. And again, it's more support and evidence to back up your system and back up the release of your products. We have the technology. Let's be smart in using it. Number 7, routine service SOP. So again, you should have business continuity in mind. What happens if something was to go down? Have you got spares? Have you got the ability to swap them out? Do you have got the knowledge? Have you got the proper training? Does your vendor give you support right away? Can you go onto their website and get onto a chat? Can you call them directly? Do you have a service level agreement in place? You want to make sure you have all these things in place. I've seen URSs that talk about this, but then at the end of the project, there's nowhere in the budget that would put an SLA in place. So again, make sure you tick the box on the URS and you have all these things in place, and you have a vendor that can offer, like, for example, weekend coverage, because you're probably going to be manufacturing during the weekend and you want to have support if something was to happen. If these filling lines were to go down, or any other type of production, especially in semiconductor, big pharmaceutical is the big one, because you could virtually lose millions of dollars per hour, depending on how valuable the product is. The same with the likes of Intel, the chipsets. Once a wafer has been processed so many times, the value of that single wafer goes up tens of thousands of dollars. So again, having something in place to make sure you're in control and you can have what you need for backup. A critical process. Number 8, let's look at backup recovery. This critical process needs to be exercised during the PQ. Like, system backup of recovery has a major importance attached to it. As particle monitoring data is GMP data, there should be a couple of layers for data backup. Data buffers built into the particle counters, for example. Will they still sample data if the network was to go down? Yes, you can have a couple of days work with some of the models out there. And then you can just buffer those results back into your system and have retrospective reports made up to see if you were still in control, and that will help you make a decision on your batches. So can the data be automatically uploaded to a secure 21 CFR 11 compliant database, or is it a manual upload? What happens when your network goes down? There's a redundancy built in there. For example, is the EMS software or external vacuum used to pull samples through remote particle counters? Are they on redundant systems? Are they on the facility UPS grid? What do you do in the event of EMS server failure? Is there an automatic redundant EMS server running in the background waiting to take over? Is the system set up on a virtual server? All these things, you need to consider and test them. Test them fully in the PQ. I can't stress enough how important the PQ is. So let's look at what's the business impact? How long does this recovery take? Is it automatic, and will the data be purged from the backup server to the secure server? So there's many questions that need to be addressed to make sure your backup and recovery process allows for business continuity. Does the EMS or partial counter vendor have remote technical or on-site technical services available? Are they 24/7? Are you in compliance with GMP Annex 11, for example, computerized systems? Do you have spare instruments and parts to minimize downtime? Is the system a plug-and-play setup? How much manual technical support do you need? Do you have service level agreements in place? What is the escalation process? Before going live, you'd want to address all of these critical questions and validate the process. Let's look at change control process. In reality, many projects are rushed based on the business impact or have only tiny shutdown windows. However, if you do put the right energy and labor and address the PQ correctly, all the stages before the PQ, right back to the initial risk assessment, your URS, SAT, IQ, OQ, will be robust enough so you can conduct a really thorough PQ. If changes are required following your quality, following your quality change control process, then updated SOPs and training around change control are mission critical. The last thing you want is an auditor looking at your EMS audit trail and noticing alarm limits were changed 6 months ago, and there was no change control documentation to support the change. You should manage any changes through an internal risk assessment. Are these changes necessary? What will the impact be, and what level of revalidation do we require? If I make this small change, what's the advantage? Because I'm going to have to potentially revalidate the whole system for this little change. Is it worth it? You need to be able to make that call. What will the impact be, and what level of revalidation will be required? Who requires retraining, and should the SOP be updated? So having a strong change control process will mitigate against overlooked issues around system changes. So I guess it's time for Q&A. And first question, like a common one, like, should you follow GAMP guidelines for EMS projects outside the pharma industry? I think you all know what my answer is. An absolute yes. In fact, when I've shown the GAMP process to companies in the semiconductor industry, they love it. They really go, oh wow, I wish we were had been following these guidelines a lot longer, or a long time ago. They really understand it. Well, some do, most do. They embrace it. And I've worked on a lot of projects in the semiconductor industry where we've applied GAMP standards out of the pharma industry, and they've worked really well. In fact, I've seen it that this type of industry, they really embrace sometimes more than the pharma industry, this standard. So yeah, it's an absolute yes. Absolutely, you can use GAMP outside of the pharma industry. Question number 2, how effective is the EMS process flow? Well, I put it together because it needed to be, because a lot of the times the customer doesn't understand what responsibilities they have. And it's a good outline to help understand the different stages, and it aligns with the GAMP model. So that way you can show this EMS process flow. You can even show it during your first kickoff meeting as project manager, if you're a vendor. And you can go by each stage. In fact, it's not a bad idea. And, you can really get down to the nuts and bolts, particularly when you start to go through the Gantt charts and looking at scheduling right down to what you're going to be doing in each clean room. Because you got to remember, when the clean room is being built, it's all hands to the deck, and especially at certain stages when the pressure's on. And the more that you're able to show what access rooms you need, what you're going to be doing in those rooms, what level of gown up is required at that stage, that the more communication you have with the customer's project manager on the other end, and the more transparency of what you're going to be doing, the better you guys can work together as one. There's been a lot of times in the past where we send our team on site, they turn up and the walls haven't even been built. This is despite our project managers even sending the customer a checklist to tick off and say yes to. It's happened a lot where we're going on site expecting to be ready and pull up our sleeves, and oh, well, the room isn't here. But we go back to the pre-installation checklist, and the customer's ticked off, yes, it's built, yes, this is done, vacuums of it, electric, Again, you got to have strong communication between two parties. It's a success for it's a recipe for success if you communicate on this level. If you don't, you're going to have issues. You're going to have project drift. You're going to have project scope. If the customer doesn't fully understand what they're getting, then there's a lot of times when I'm going to say it, the shit hits the fan. There's a lot of bad feeling, especially when there's a lot of pressure involved. And you've got to be able to work together. And by showing upfront the whole process, that really helps. It does. It really helps in my mind to work your way towards a successful project. I've talked about this one a little bit, PQ. The question number 3, is the OQ as good as a replacement PQ, as we have redone the vendor's OQ for our PQ? No. Do not redo the vendor's OQ and call it your PQ. We've just covered this. And the reason I'm highlighting it is because I don't see a lot of good, strong performance qualification being carried out. And customers not putting it into their budget. I think I'm starting to see a little bit of a trend where there is some more focused on that, particularly as more external auditors get involved. And we work with a lot of auditors, and they get to know the Lighthouse way of putting in the monitoring system. And we've had situations where these consultants, we've worked with them on other projects, and they've taken aspects of the successful projects we've worked together on, and they've started to, push the customers into, performing the qualification themselves and not just recarrying out the OQ, and really putting some good thought into the overall performance qualification. Because really, guys, I can't stress enough, it's your last chance to get everything right before this system goes live. And the last thing you'd want as the owner of the system is for something to go wrong and potentially lose millions of dollars worth of product, and you're going to look like an imbecile in front of your manager, and he's not going to be really kind to you on your next review. So what's that saying? Fail to prepare, prepare to fail. Yeah, I really strongly would advocate you put a lot of effort and energy into your PQ. If there's any of you out there that needs some support and help, drop me a line. I'm more than happy to put you in the right direction. It's really important. Really, really important. Do not rehash the OQ and call it good. You're not doing justice to yourself, to your company, to the monitoring system. How important is PQ to the EMS system operation? It's the end all and be all. You're looking for the weakest link. The PQ is your last line of defense to fully test an operational system before you go live. So as I said, the critical parts of making sure your alarms are good, and making sure you're getting meaningful data from the locations you've selected. Have you got enough coverage in those locations? Or have you got some good automated reports? And what are you reporting on? How do you know if you're in compliance? Will your reports tell you that straight away? Does the system have a compliance report? It's really important. The PQ in my mind, once done successfully, you're not going to have problems with your EMS down the line. In fact, if you don't do a good PQ, you will have problems with your EMS down the line. I've seen it time and time again, guys. It really is important to get that in place. As I said, there's a paper on our website. If you can't find it, drop me a line, jasonk@golighthouse.com. All right, I'm going to leave it there for today. It's been a good 2 months with part 1 and part 2 of focusing on the whole process of an environmental monitoring system. So there you go, folks. You've had my 27 years of experience put down into 2 webinars. I hope you've enjoyed it. Next year, we're going to have a lot of more exciting webinars with Hashim and the team. Devin, our product manager, is working really hard to get some really good topics together, and I myself will be, working for you guys to deliver some good information and deliver the knowledge, and that's what it's all about. So I would like to say to you all, have a good Christmas, and let's hope 2022 will be a great year in many ways. God knows we've all been through the ring at the moment, but good things will happen. And I wish you all a happy new year, and we'll get back mid-January or towards the end of January with our next webinar. So stay tuned, and I guess Devin will be sending out invites to January's webinar. And we welcome you all back. Take care. Be safe, everybody.